It is good to have you on Omira TV, Ajibola Adigun.
Good to see you.
Let's talk about Africa, our fatherland.
Our motherland.
Oh, thank you. Our motherland. Africa is, as we know, blessed in human and natural resources. Yet, Africa is the poorest continent in the world. Ajibola, why is Africa poor?
Well, I think poverty is the natural order of things. Different countries and different continents in the world have been poor at one point or the other. So that's the natural order of things. The question we should ask is, why is Africa not progressing? And that's where we have different reasons, from bad governance, from leadership crisis, from lack of initiative, from lack of transparency in governance, from just basically a lack of freedom.
How do we make Africans free then? What are the things to be done to make Africa free and then more progressive than it is currently?
Of course, it cuts across different avenues. There's the freedom to trade, freedom of speech, basically just human dignity. And human dignity has to do with the ability to do as you wish, as long as you don't hurt any other person. Because we are talking about Africa in general, I might have to make some instances. For example, we're having the Sudan uprising, for example. We've had the fall of Omar Bashir. We've had different dictators falling, but that's just half of the story. Because it is one thing to have a democratic government in scare quotes, in the sense that to have a democracy is not just about elections. It's also about respecting the needs of the people, having constant engagement with citizens, and having their input in your policies. It's also about making sure that your legitimacy is always based on the citizens that you rule, and not necessarily about external pressures to do this and not do that. But in the long run, it's about having dignity for your citizens, because I mean you cannot have a vibrant media, for example, if you don't have freedom of the press. You cannot have growth in your economy if you have different sort of tariffs, you have different sort of roadblocks to business registration, you have all these petty roadblocks to progress.
Speaking of roadblocks to progress in Africa, the African Free Trade Agreement has just gone into effect on the 30th of May. And Nigeria, Africa's biggest economy, hasn't signed yet. If Nigeria doesn't sign, what happens?
It's unfortunate, and it's such a pity that Nigeria has started thinking of itself as a tin giant, basically, like a foil giant with all noise and no substance. And if you look at those three countries that haven't signed, which is Nigeria, Benin Republic, and Eritrea,
yeah.
I mean, think about the company of people that we are in. Benin Republic is already the 37th state in Nigeria anyway. And so, in essence, we already have a free trade agreement with Benin Republic. Unfortunately, it's to our disadvantage because we don't have a free trade agreement with the rest of Africa. So, we are basically shooting ourselves in the leg. And if you look at Eritrea, which is basically coming out of a dictatorship, you would realize that Nigeria is not really doing itself a big favor by not signing. Moreover, most African countries have already signed anyway, so they are doing themselves more harm than good. They might as well join the party, even though they joined late.
Basically, that is to Nigeria's loss.
It is to Nigeria's loss.
Let's also talk about the Chinese investment in loans and contracts in Africa. Since 2005 to 2018, it is reported that Chinese investment is a total of $299 billion. Should we be skeptical of China relations with African nations?
Well, the Sino-Africa relationship is one of, I think it's a very complex. It all depends on how you look at investment. Everyone who comes to investment comes with their own incentives and their own aspirations. So it's not so much as to be skeptical of China's interest in Africa, because we know that it's about Chinese interest. Now, what is Africa's interest is the question we should be asking. If you go into a deal with China and you think that the loans, even though they don't have different conditions to it, well, it comes at a price, because if you fail to pay up and they take over your naval yard or then you have yourself to blame. You basically have to be self-critical and know what you want from the investment. So China is not really the danger we think it is. It's actually more of a self-reflective, and how do you go into a trade partnership with a bigger trade partner?
What do you think are the biggest challenges facing Africa's development?
Well, I think like Chinua Achebe said, the problem with Nigeria, and I can say that for Africa too, is really a problem of leadership. I mean, Nigerians are not, quoting Achebe again, Nigerians are not, or Africans are not what they should be, because Africa is not what it should be, because the leaders are not what they should be. So I think it's basically about leadership. I mean, if you have a leadership that is driven, I mean, we've had such leaders in Africa before. If we have leaders whose interest is really about the development of the continent, I'm sure that we can find a solution to every of our problems. We have the resources, we have the manpower, we have everything it takes. We just need the right leadership.
How do we get the right leader?
Well, I'm not one for much prayers without hard work. I believe that even good leadership also takes hard work, and it's about everyone thinking that they are a leader in their own right and in their own sphere. So if you're a teacher, you show the right leadership to your students. If you're a mom, you show the right leadership to your children. If you're a person in public service, you show the right leadership to your colleagues and the people that you lead.
Are you basically saying that we should lead ourselves as Africans?
In fact, we have to lead ourselves, because as long as we continue thinking that leadership is something that is bestowed to a culture or some set of people, then we would be relegating that sort of direction to other people instead of leading ourselves.
Thank you so much, Ajibola Adigun. Regards to your students at the University of KwaZulu-Natal.
Thank you very much for having me on Minority.